G'day guys, my name's Nick and this is Nicktrition. Today's video is a video version of a podcast I was recently a guest on called the Lean Life Radio. I've been on the Lean Life Radio a couple of times and Simon the host was nice enough to share the video version of his podcast with me, which he's allowed me to upload to my YouTube channel. Now this is about an hour long, so I'm not going to waste too much time at the start here, so remember to like and subscribe, and without further ado, here is the Lean Life Radio.
Hey there, and welcome to today's episode of Lean Life Radio. And this episode, you're not going to be listening to me. Well, you might be listening to me for a little bit, but we have a very special guest. We are welcoming back, I think, off the top of my head, for the fourth time, maybe fifth, Nick Whiteman of Nicktrition. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, mate. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. We're in the UK. The snow is here. Yeah. The world, or the UK, has fallen into crisis because there is a tiny blanket of snow. But other than that, and obviously coronavirus is still around, but that's secondary to snow now. That's come along. Other than that, we're all good. We're all good. How are things in sunny Germany?
I mean, no snow here to speak of. At least in the UK, there's no disruptions to people getting to work because no one can actually go to work. So it's the snow's come at a time that's actually pretty good for everyone. But yeah, I mean, Germany's pretty snowless. We had like a couple of days of really light snow, which is kind of disappointing because I have like some really good ideas for like some video stuff I want to do if we actually get like a good downpour of snow. And now you guys are all sitting over there going, oh shit, the snow's here. And I'm like, I really could use it.
Yeah. And you mentioned you got your videos. So if the people who don't know, who haven't maybe come across your episodes, because we recorded those a little while ago now, so it'll be fresh to some people. Nick has a pretty awesome YouTube channel. He's going hard on the YouTube. I think you did you do a whole of December, one a day? That was the whole thing to kind of like launch the thing. Is that right?
I managed one video a day for every day in December. Awesome. And since then I've been keeping up with 3 a week because just like one a day was good and I could maintain it, but the quality of the videos were kind of like some days I just have to really rush them out. And there's a few videos there now that I want to redo in a couple of months just to kind of like put a better version of it out. And when you're doing something every day, you kind of lose the love for it, where like I obviously, enjoy nutrition and training and teaching people about that, but I also really enjoy video editing. But I don't enjoy it when I have to do it every day and have like a deadline of midnight to get it out. Like there was some super, technically I think some of them came out like 1 a.m. the next day. So I ended up saying instead of one every day in December, it was 1 for every day in December. But I mean, I managed to get them out even on like Christmas Day and stuff, even if they were just like a, hey, Merry Christmas, just to get a video out. And because nobody wants to watch me talk about, how many calories are in their turkey when they're sitting down for their Christmas lunch.
Yeah. I know the feeling, because back in the day, I used to do a daily vlog on YouTube. And if you ever go on my YouTube channel and you find those, I think I've tried to hide them quite well, but they are still there. I did a whole thing. I filmed my entire day and then spent the evening editing that and then pushing that out in the late evening. And doing that was just like, nah, I'm not doing this.
Very Casey Neistat, that. I'm guessing if you've done vlogs, you've heard of Casey Neistat. Not even he does them anymore though. Like he did it for a couple of years and kind of just ran dry of things to do in his day. I've got a few ideas for some like vlog style videos, but I mean, someone's got to like really be into you as a person and not just like your channel or your brand or the information you're putting out to care about what you do in a day. So most of my like vlog style ideas that I have are like what I eat in a day, because obviously when you look like me and eat the way that I do, some people are pretty interested in, how that's, possible.
And we're actually going to use that now as a segue into the main topic of today's podcast, because Nick, for those who are maybe listening to this on a podcast, not watching on YouTube, Nick is a big dude in terms of he's packed on a ton of muscle. He's got a big beard. He might be, maybe see him in the street, a little bit intimidating, but he's a lovely guy. And he is also a vegan. So I think that in and of itself is quite an interesting sort of concept, because some people will have it in their minds that maybe vegan, difficult to build, maybe even maintain muscle. Maybe they got this picture of, as soon as you go vegan, you're going to lose all of your muscle and then, lose all the gains. And so therefore you want to stay away from that diet. We've also got a bunch of people who will be doing Veganuary, who might want to understand, okay, well, actually, I've maybe found these first 4 weeks a little bit difficult. How do I actually make this easier? So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you, Nick, a bunch of questions about being a vegan and giving people some top tips, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it should be, because that's why I brought you on. So first of all, let's get a bit of background to Nick and kind of what brought you to being a vegan in the first place. Was there a specific reason, a specific sort of like light bulb moment or anything like that? Did you watch a Netflix documentary and say, you know what, that's for me? Or was it a bit more of an organic process?
No, it was definitely more organic. No organic food though, because I'm not that kind of vegan. But I, like growing up as a teenager, I was kind of on and off of different foods for ethical reasons, and it did go to a few points of vegetarianism and even like a brief stint of veganism back to like, me as a teenager is a really long time ago now. So like, it was always like this ethical consideration to food is something I'd always kind of thought about. And, I wasn't one of the blind teenagers who was like, didn't know where their food was coming from. They were just eating what mom and dad were putting on the plate. And it started off with like the kind of like obvious things as, someone who feels a bit of empathy. I didn't really want to eat lamb. I didn't want to eat veal because I was like, right, these are the baby animals, right? And I kind of just went, over the years, I was like, right, so if I don't want to eat baby animals, why is it okay to eat them when they're a little bit older? And I mean, nothing that is used for meat consumption is particularly old in animal years anyway. Like, they might get 2 years old before they get slaughtered, and they might have lived to 10 times that if they were just left to their natural life. So it kind of was pretty natural and organic the way that it came about. And there was a time there where I was just like vegetarian, and I would keep, moving into veganism and then popping back and, flip-flopping. And, it's still something now that I think about. But I think it's the ethical side of things that really, got me there, pushed me over the line, and keeps doing it. I mean, they don't make it easy. Vegan protein tastes like shit compared to whey. So, there's no like good vegan cheese that actually tastes like real cheese. So, there's a few things that obviously you kind of miss, but, I think for anyone, have you seen the RSPCA sign? Or it might be, I don't know if it's RSPCA in the UK, but it's a whole bunch of animals lined up. And it's like, ones that people technically like, habitually eat. And then it goes into like horse, cat, dog, like keeps working its way across, and it says, where do you draw the line? And for most people, they can draw it in the same place, but I mean, kind of depends on your ethics. If you kind of, I feel like for a lot of people, it's whether you put yourself above, the life of that animal. And for me, I mean, I've obviously got good enough muscle building genetics that I can get away with, still relatively looking how I want and performing how I want without having to consume animal products. And that's not going to be the same for everyone. So again, if it didn't work for me, if I went vegan and completely lost all my muscle, maybe I would have changed my mind. But for me, in my case, that hasn't happened, and I've had no reason to, completely go back. And I'm not perfect. I every now and then will, either inadvertently or, completely knowing what's going on, have something that's not vegan. But I mean, every time I do any of that, I'm either blindsided or completely conscious of that decision. So
it's an interesting one, because for people who maybe listen to this for the first time, I'm not vegan, but I've made a conscious decision to reduce my consumption of animal products. And that's from a point of view of, I personally, maybe again, not necessarily based on a bunch of research and stuff like that. It's just that I don't feel it's necessary to eat tons of animal products to achieve goals and to maintain health and things like that. And I think that there are lots of advantages to having a broad, diverse range of different foods and having a plant-based diet, whether you add in some animal products or not, based on your preferences. But I now don't have a whey protein powder. So I actually have switched to a vegan protein powder, and I do actually quite like it. I know people will ask me, so I'll say the brand. I'm not going to get a kickback. I'm not going to put a link in the this show notes or whatever. But I use Protein Works vegan protein. And it's really nice. Not got that sort of chalkiness that you kind of have or anything like that. And it doesn't taste like buttholes. It's kind of nice. And then in sort of like, for example, my evening meals or stuff like that, I've used some sort of vegan substitutes for various different meats, or consciously said, you know what, instead of having like I normally would, I don't know, 200 grams of this or whatever, just try and cut that back, maybe mix it with a vegan sort of protein, just so that, you know, I feel like I'm not just doing it because I can't think of anything else to eat. So I'm just going to pile on this. Not that there's anything bad with eating meat if that's kind of your fits within your ethics and it's, you know, it's still healthy and things like that. But it's interesting that I think that there are lots of people who are, you know, progressing that way. And one of the questions that I had for you was, you mentioned a little bit about, you know, maybe like dabbled into being a vegetarian and things like that. I don't know if this is the right phrase, but did you eventually just go cold turkey, or was it a gradual transition, or did you just kind of say overnight, that's it, no more for me?
I mean, there's been a few times where I've gone backwards and forwards, and I've definitely done the overnight, that's it, no more for me. And there was always something that, you know, had me going back. And again, it comes to the point where, you know, eventually I just got the idea of like, right, do I really care how much worse my protein tastes? And I mean, you're right, there are much better choices out there now than when I started going vegan. But back then it was just the chalky versions, that's all you had. And I really just got to the point where I was like, you know what, it's not more important that I can enjoy my protein shake than it is for the animals to be alive. And so there have definitely been times where I was just cold turkey. But I think the most successful time that I did it, and that actually hasn't been this time, but the way that I found it the easiest was I just cut out any animal, what's the best way to say here? Any animal product that there was a vegan alternative for. So it started with like, you know, whatever dairy product, well, obviously it started with meat because I haven't eaten meat in crap load of time. Like even when I go back to vegetarianism, I never go into meat. But yeah, so it's just started with replacing some dairy foods, and, you know, every time I could find an alternative that was not animal based, I would swap it out. And eventually just got to the point where there was only like 2 or 3 things that I was consuming fairly regularly that were animal based. And I was just like, fuck it. You know, I don't really, there's nothing I'm getting from those foods that's particularly important to my health or to my goals. They're just ones that I kind of like eating. So I just stopped eating them. It wasn't that hard. I don't even get cheese cravings anymore. So, you know.
And what would you say to, I imagine there are some listeners, and I've had clients in the past who kind of, whether they've been speaking to someone or they've read an article or they've just had an overwhelming feeling build up that they want to make a switch. Mm-hmm. Based on the fact that you've been through that process, maybe you've kind of had some stuttered starts with it, having learned lessons, gone through the process, what tips would you give for someone who's maybe considering it seriously to say, you know what, I do want to make this lifestyle switch. Mm-hmm. Having done it, what would you kind of say, this is some tips for getting it right, let's say?
Yeah, there's a couple. So some people just remove animal products and don't replace them with anything, and then wonder why they're feeling really low on energy. And, you know, usually those people weren't overweight in the first place. I find that people who are already at are healthy or maybe even underweight generally don't think to replace foods when they don't eat them. They're not really food focused. Some people will overcompensate when replacing those foods. So, for example, some people know that, I'm cutting out a whole bunch of protein sources. I need to add in some protein sources, but, the protein sources you get on a vegan diet aren't always going to be, the same way meat is, where it's just protein and maybe some trace amounts of fat. It's, lentils, which is protein, but more carbs than protein. Or it's like tofu, where it's protein, but still a crap ton of fat in there. And they supplement like gram for gram the protein that they were eating before, and then find that they're gaining weight. So it would still be taking into account your overall calorie balance, and then I find for people who really want to maintain body composition, you have to be very protein focused. Like, you can't have, if you used to have chicken and pasta, for example, well, now you might just have to have a high protein pasta, like they have the chickpea pasta, and a little bit of seitan or something like that in it. And it's not as big of a meal as you had before. It doesn't involve as many ingredients as you had before. But as far as your macros and actually just as far as your macros go, you are consuming the same amount. And then your macros, you're probably consuming more in most cases, because a lot of people do still think that the only vegan foods out there are fruits and vegetables. So in general, most people's micronutrient intake will go up. And the last one is, if you end up doing this long term, so if you've done it for Veganuary and now you're like, right, that was easy, let's do this for the next year or whatever, if you want to challenge yourself or if you want to make a permanent change. The next one is to make sure your micronutrition isn't just increased, because it will increase if you increase your fruit and vegetable intake, but there's some specific things for the vegan diet that are at a deficit compared to an omnivorous diet. And they're like calcium, iron, B12. Let's see if I can remember them all. Omega-3s. There's a bunch. I did a video on it. But
it's on the YouTube channel.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of micronutrition that is specifically, iodine's one of them, specifically low on a vegan diet. And there are vegan sources where you can get those things, but in general, they're not as bioavailable, which means they're not digested and don't make it into the blood as easily as animal-based versions of those. So you might have to look at supplementation. Again, that's only really applicable if you go beyond like the end of Veganuary, for example, because that first month, you're probably not going to deplete your stores of a lot of those vitamins anyway. Your body stores things like B12 for a really long time, and it uses like a real fraction of your stores each day. So people can go for years without consuming any B12 and not have B12 deficiency. But when they have B12 deficiency, that's bad news. So it's definitely something worth being proactive about. And probably one of the bigger mistakes that people get, like a lot of people go, oh, I went vegan and I found I was really tired all the time. And it could have just been something as simple as, taking an iron supplement, and they would have felt just the same as they did before.
Cool. And you mentioned there, obviously, protein and protein intake. So, again, experience with maybe not so much clients. I mean, I've had a couple of vegan clients over the years, but not sort of my domain. But I certainly had lots of vegans ask questions. So whether I'm doing podcasts or going on a live on Instagram or something like that, I may get asked questions by vegans. Mm-hmm. And often the question you get from someone who's maybe just starting is all around the protein. How do I get to a protein target? What protein sources do you recommend? Could you give people maybe a bit of an insight into what does Nick eat in a day when it comes to protein sources across the different meals? So when you're looking at breakfast, lunch, dinner, pre-workout, post-workout, whatever you kind of do, what sort of protein sources are your kind of go-to on a regular basis? Because I imagine you're hitting quite a high protein target because you're quite a big dude, right?
Yeah, I mean, there have been times where I was hitting like 300 grams of all vegan protein. So the considerations you need to have there, obviously, around protein is that some of them come with, large amounts of fiber. If you were to get all your protein from, lentils and pulses and beans and stuff, you're having a bad time. You know that South Park meme where it's a ski instructor, like you're going to have a bad time. Basically, so the way I do it is I kind of look for, like I said before, I'm pretty protein centric. So I will look for a lot of soy products because despite all the media, soy actually doesn't give you titties. It might give you pecs. Let me see if I can pec pump here. Yeah, so soy won't give you titties, so you can completely just go and pretty much have as much soy as you want. I've seen some studies where people are having like well over a pound of soy per day or soy products per day, and it's not an issue. And that's, I think it was soy concentrate. So it wasn't just like a pound of tofu, it was a pound of the soy protein that came in whatever products they ate. Anyway, so I'm pretty soy, I would call myself a soy boy. And the reason for that is because soy is one of the only vegan sources that is a complete protein. Yeah, it's not as bioavailable if you have it in like tofu or tempeh or anything like that. But if you're having soy isolate, it's pretty close to whey when you look at all the data. So yeah, a lot of soy. I'll have a lot of protein shakes as well because again, I'm pretty protein centric. Usually I try and swap between a soy protein isolate because if I'm having a lot of soy products during the day, even though the research doesn't show that there's any adverse effects, I think it's just a generally good idea to get your protein from multiple sources, not just from one. So if I'm having a lot of like soy yogurt or tofu or tempeh or any other soy products, soy milk is a big one. I've been known to just down a liter of soy milk, good 33 grams of protein right there. If I'm having a lot of soy in the day, I'll go with a protein blend, vegan protein blend, which is usually, I get one from bulk powders, not because there's anything special about it. It's good enough, it's cheap enough, and it's got a complete amino acid profile. They use pea, rice, and pumpkin seed protein in the one that I use. But basically, if you can get one that's pea and rice, and I can't remember what it is about rice protein you have to be careful of, but it can be, the way they store it and treat it can be harmful. So you have to make sure that it's, what's the word I'm looking for? Cyanide, maybe? No, that's apple seeds. Anyway, just make sure your rice protein isolate comes from a good, reputable source, and mix it with some pea protein. And that's how I pretty much make sure that my snacks and breakfasts are sorted, is if I'm having, some faux dairy, which is usually going to be soy, and then protein shakes. And when I'm looking at actual meals, again, I'm looking at protein combinations that end up being complete, because while lentils aren't complete and while seitan isn't complete, they're both pretty high in protein. And when you combine them together, because one is a grain and one is a legume, that means one is high in methionine and one's low. So you put them together, they have a good amount of methionine. And likewise with a bunch of other amino acids. But basically, I did all the research. So if anyone wants to do it, legumes and seitan go really well as far as making a complete protein. And it's kind of like having rice and whatever meat, chicken or whatever. And that's like my main go-tos. I'll supplement in like chickpeas instead of legumes, instead of lentils sometimes, but pretty much, I'll have like a few meals that I rock all the time. And like most people who have body composition goals, I kind of have, most of my meals each day are the same. And I might have like a variation for one of those each day, just because I get sick of eating all the same food. But if I'm like working and stuff, man, I don't care if I have a protein shake at the same time every day.
Yeah, I'm the same. Take as many decisions away from me as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that, I guess there's a similar thing, whether you're vegan or otherwise, in the sense that I have a certain number of meals per day that, if I had to, I would love to eat them every single day, because I just actually enjoy them. And then, like you say, you might have a few variations, but then it kind of gives you the thing of, okay, well, actually, I really only need to think about dinner make dinner different. And when you think about it, people often say that they like variance, they like a little variety of meals, but actually, no one's cooking 365 different meals every day, every year. We've got maybe half a dozen to a dozen meals that we put on constant rotation, and maybe if you optimize the protein intake of those meals, well then you may take a little bit of legwork up front, but once you've done it, it's just then, okay, we'll flex these from day to day and keep it varied from that perspective.
Exactly. I get a lot of clients who are either vegan and then want to move towards a body composition goal, or not vegan, have a body composition goal and want to move towards a more plant-based diet. And I have a whole bunch of meals that I've already done the research on, and I can just plug in like their protein requirements, and it will come out with a rough, how much of this per meal they need mixed with how much of this. So like for me personally and for my clients, I've done the legwork, but it's not that hard. Like you can research amino acid profiles of pretty much any food online. And it's all about just making sure that you have all the essential amino acids in enough quantities in the feeding. And, there's a lot of people out there who say that you can get by with having enough of each amino acid throughout the course of the day. But there also would probably say that how much protein you have per day is more important than how you break it up during the day. And while it is I'm a big believer, like if you, for example, let's use whey as an example, because it's the gold standard of protein. If you had whey for your protein serve, 5 times a day, and they were all 2.5 to 4 hours apart, you could get away with having 150 grams of whey if that was your, requirement. If that hit your leucine threshold each serve, instead of having mixed meals where you're having, 40, 50 grams of protein each meal, and then you're having like 200, because of the bioavailability. And if you optimize all these things, the actual amount of protein you have per day might actually not be as important as some people make it out to be. And it might be equally important, or depending on your dietary choices, to have an optimized amount of protein per meal. But it also depends on your goal. If you don't care about having or gaining muscle, enough protein per day is all you need to care about.
And what about, just kind of maybe spinning on from that, if you have got a specific goal around building muscle, preserving muscle if you're in a deficit or whatever, when you are a vegan, do you kind of aim for a little bit more protein than if you are consuming animal products, or do you kind of roughly ballpark it around the same number?
So I tend to go off a rough estimated net protein. So what you actually get from it, not what you consume. So if we go back to using whey as a gold standard, whey, although it's not 100% bioavailable, not every gram of protein in the whey makes it into your blood. It's the one that makes it, the protein makes it into your blood the most from whey than anything else. And trying to get stuff that is as close to that as possible, like as I said before, soy protein isolate is pretty close. So if I had, if my leucine threshold was to have 30 grams of whey, I might have 35 grams of soy. But if I was going to have a meal that was mixed, so maybe it was like that lentils and seitan meal I was talking about before, then I might be looking at, 50 grams of protein in that meal to try and get the same amount of actual amino acids into the bloodstream and actually initiate muscle protein synthesis to the same amount. And when you look at, because everyone talks about leucine, and it is important, and it is that initial trigger for muscle protein synthesis, but they've done studies where they compared whey to like just pure wheat protein, for example. And once you hit that leucine threshold, if you have more of the other amino acids in the bloodstream because you consumed more total protein, it has been shown to affect muscle protein synthesis in a bigger way. I think the study I'm thinking of just off the top of my head, it was 30 grams of whey. They compared it to 30 grams of wheat protein. Obviously the wheat really underperformed. They then matched them for leucine content and ended up being, I think, 65 grams of wheat protein versus the 30 grams of whey. And that hit the leucine threshold, initiated muscle protein synthesis, and had almost double the amount of amino acids that made it into the bloodstream. So it's going to be on a meal by meal basis, and there's other things that come into it, but the bioavailability is the biggest thing. Obviously, any protein that's isolated is going to be more bioavailable than one that's concentrated. One that's concentrated is going to be more bioavailable than just what's in the food already. So like if you use milk for an example, whey isolate, more bioavailable than whey concentrate, which is more bioavailable than just the protein casein, whatever it is in milk. And it's kind of just using that as a rough guide.
Yeah, and kind of as we're going along here, maybe people are kind of piecing together some of the things that they may have heard about a vegan diet. You're kind of dispelling some myths here. And to add on to that, I wanted to ask you about your own personal experience. And we kind of mentioned at the start that maybe there's this perception among some people that you're going to lose a bunch of muscle because it's going to be difficult to hit protein. Maybe the protein's not as, like bioavailable or as good quality in inverted commas. In your own experience, did you notice any difference in terms of body composition? Did you lose a little bit of muscle? Did you have to do something different to kind of maintain it other than just eat a little bit more protein? Did you notice any differences in terms of body composition?
Not so much, but you got to understand as well, like I'm a nutritionist, so I had a good understanding of all of that stuff before I did it. I mean, as any nutritionist would, like, you wouldn't start a keto diet without understanding all the stuff behind a keto diet. And I did the same thing when I made the choice to go fully plant-based, was to research it all before I did it and, filter out all the garbage that you see from, most of the vegan sources out there and kind of get really down into the important information and what is actually true and not just, correlation instead of causation, which is pretty much what all those Netflix documentaries are based on, just that, correlation instead of causation, or just completely omitting any relevant studies. Yeah, I personally noticed that I put on a little bit of fat at the start, but that's because I was trying to get in, as I said before, 300 grams of protein per day. And it was pushing me over my daily calorie allowance a little bit. And probably not just because of the more food coming in, but also probably because I made that initial mistake of going too heavy on the fiber too quickly. And it was making me feel garbage. And, that obviously led to my, incidental exercise being much lower than normal. And so it probably was to do with both things. But all I did then was, rather than trying to maintain, going relatively all whole foods, I then incorporated some more processed food, which is just like isolated versions of proteins, which meant that I wasn't getting as much fiber and wasn't taking in as much food volume. And, it evened out pretty quickly. But like anyone else, like I have times where I don't really pay attention to my diet that much and I'll put on some body fat, and I have times where I pay more attention and I start to drop some body fat. So a lot of that was probably also that I was taking the attention away from my body composition and more towards making this transition without any adverse health effects, which is probably, and I also wanted to keep my performance up, because at the time I was still playing semi-pro rugby and I was still competing at like national level in powerlifting and stuff. So I had other goals that probably exacerbated that a bit more than normal.
Yeah, and I had a question popped into my head about social situations, social kind of events and things like that. So again, I'm just trying to maybe put myself in the shoes of someone who's thinking about going vegan. So obviously, while we've got you here, we can ask these questions, and I'm trying to be the voice of the listener here. So we've just had Christmas, and that comes with it a centerpiece almost of that event that is food-based. There's turkey is the traditional thing. It might be different in different households. And then when you kind of look through the calendar, we've got all of these different events where food is kind of like the center point. So for example, if we're doing I know Thanksgiving, I've got an American wife, so Thanksgiving's a big thing. That's turkey. When you might be thinking about, I don't know, birthdays, if someone made you a birthday cake, I guess that unless they were specifically kind of doing something special for you, it's got some ingredients that are non-vegan in it.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's, I don't know, whether it's Sunday morning, just fancy a bacon sandwich. You've got all of these different sorts of things that maybe other people are doing around you. So how does someone who's maybe coming into these sorts of events, family get-togethers, how best could they start to navigate those as a newly transitioned vegan when there's maybe some social pressure, but also that kind of memory of, oh yeah, I used to really enjoy that meal, turkey, whatever. How do they kind of, maybe some tips to navigate that?
Yeah. So everyone's, as I've mentioned a couple of times, everyone's kind of got their own line that they're not willing to cross, but they'll probably also have like another self-imposed line that is a little more flexible. If I, for example, so if I came to your house and your wife was like, oh, Nick, I heard you were coming and I made this beautiful American apple pie, I wouldn't be like, hold on a second, does that have real butter in it? I'd just eat some and not be a dickhead about it, you know? But that's my personal line. You know, there might be people out there who've gone plant-based for whatever reason, and maybe they're still open to eating meat, and then they would, you know, you can just continue with that holiday or whatever without making waves, or you can do what I do. Like we had Christmas at ours this year because, you know, most of the people in Berlin couldn't go anywhere, and we have a few close friends here, and they had a full normal, you know, UK style Christmas with meat everywhere and all that stuff. And I just had some sides, and I had like a small dish of my own food where, you know, it didn't have meat and stuff in it, and nobody complained at all. Like, I mean, a few people were like, oh, why aren't you eating any? And I'm like, oh yeah, I don't eat that. And the reason they even asked is because I don't go around shouting to everyone like, you know, like a lot of vegans do, like, oh, I'm a vegan, look at me, you know. I'm still a normal person. I just choose to not eat animal products. And, you know, I'm not perfect. And as I said, if, you know, somebody was to offer me something and it was, you know, a brownie they made or whatever, I'm not going to question them about it and give them the third degree. I'm going to just eat it and be thankful and, you know, whatever.
Awesome. You also mentioned, you referenced Netflix documentaries and things like that. We obviously got Game Changers out there, and probably many other documentaries that I've not bothered to watch that are related to vegan and other sorts of diets and things like that. What is your opinion on, let's say, Game Changers and any other sort of Netflix documentaries that have referenced veganism as being like the greatest thing on earth?
I mean, Game Changers is a funny one because probably the one that had the most people in the fitness industry second guessing themselves. I mean, anyone who doesn't know anything about nutrition but does care about their body composition or their performance probably went from thinking I have to eat all this meat and all this protein that's animal based to thinking, oh shit, can I do this without it? So like I've fielded these questions since it came out. Almost as if I was involved in making the movie myself, which I wasn't. So the problem with Game Changers specifically is that they took a bunch of athletes who are very successful in their sports, but by no means are they the best in the world at anything they've done. I mean, probably the one who could claim that they're the best in the world is actually Patrick Verbumium, who I've actually met, and I've trained with him here in Germany. He lives really near Berlin. And yeah, he was really good at that one event, but he's never won World's Strongest Man or anything like that, you know. So they've used a bunch of athletes who were like really cherry picked, and you know they were great at their sport, but it's not like they were the best, and it was because they were vegan. And that's how they kind of tried to make it out. Like they kind of glossed over the third place medals and kind of just went, you know, did really well at the Olympics, and you know, this person had a world record in this. They got broken almost immediately, but we don't mention that. You know, we just mentioned that 5 years ago they had the world record in this. So it was really misleading. They also really cherry-picked evidence. Like, I mean, the first time that they talk about in that film, and I say film, not documentary, on purpose, but in that film, the first time they mention science is when they're like, oh, I was looking at some archaeological records of the gladiators, which has nothing to do with nutrition. And they also checked, they were like, oh, the gladiators were, performed really well because they ate vegetables. No, they also ate other stuff. They just had a really high intake of things like beans and legumes because gladiators were poor and that's what they got given. A lot of them were made to fight and that's what they got given by whoever owned them or whatever. So I think it's, and all the scientific tests that they did or studies they did during the film, notice how no papers came out from any of those things because they weren't actual scientific studies. They were just demonstrations for the purpose of the cameras being there. And excuse me, you look at the burrito example they had, where they had a steak burrito, a chicken burrito, and a vegan burrito, and they compared the serum levels of fat in the bloodstream, but they just compared it at one point, which they knew what point would be the highest for the animal proteins, the animal products. And they also knew what point would probably not be very high for the fat in the avocado because they matched it for fats. But it's not like the fat in the avocado doesn't make it into the bloodstream, just makes it in at a different, like every different duration as the fat in whatever meat products they were having. So they really misled the audience on purpose, which really, it annoyed the shit out of me. And the final example I'll give from Game Changers is they said, a peanut butter sandwich has as much protein as a steak, which could be true, but they didn't mention how many calories it has or anything like that. And that's probably the question I got asked the most when it came out was, oh, how does a peanut butter sandwich have as much calories as steak? And I even ended up saving it in my Fitness Pal, where I just had a peanut butter sandwich that had I can't remember, it was over 100 grams of peanut butter on it. And I was like, here's the peanut butter sandwich macros, here's the steak macros. You can see it has the same amount of protein. Oh, but what about those calories? Well, they didn't mention the calories, neither did you, it's not that hard to just apply a bit of logic to some of the stuff they said. And then there's a whole bunch of really good breakdowns. I know Layne Norton did a really good breakdown of the Game Changers, but even that, from my point of view, there's no good reason to go vegan or plant-based that isn't ethical. That is a primary consideration. Unless there's you've got really high levels of bad cholesterol and your doctor's advised you, maybe you should stop eating animal products for a while to try and get that lower. Maybe there's something to be talked about there, but for the most part, it's an ethical decision. And even in Layne Norton's rebuttal to Game Changers, the first thing they say is, let's take the ethical equation out of this. And I'm like, well, that's the only reason anybody should be going vegan. If you're going vegan and it's not for ethical reasons, then you've either believed a lie that you've been told, or you're doing it for the wrong reasons. If you're doing it for the environment, that's still technically an ethical decision anyway. But a lot of things like soy, for example, still has more of an impact on the environment than chicken. But a lot of the soy production goes into feeding those chickens and the cows and whatever. So it's really hard to equate things like the environmental impact. But from a health perspective, just a general health, someone who has no body composition goals, there's no benefit to being vegan over not being vegan, other than you might accidentally eat more vegetables or more fruit. But that's not because of the vegan diet. That's because there's less choice and you didn't know what else to pick. And, for the, basically for the athletes or the people who have body composition goals or performance goals, it's really hard to make a vegan diet equate an omnivorous diet. For so many reasons. Some people do report, as you saw in Game Changers, some people do report better performance when they move to a vegan diet. In general, that's because they increase their carbohydrate intake because, like I said earlier, a lot of those proteins like lentils and soy and stuff like that generally come with higher amounts of carbohydrate than steak or chicken or whatever they're eating before.
Cool. I've got two more questions for you, Nick. One is just maybe again linked to what you just said there, in a sense that let's assume that, you know, someone who is maybe thinking about going vegan, maybe is vegan, is now trying to lose body fat. They understand calorie deficit. They're going to go with that as their approach, and it's going to be based on a plant-based diet. Then they've got sort of this thing where now they've got trying to maybe hit a protein target potentially, but they're now picking sources that have a little bit more trace carbohydrates and fats and things like that. That's got an impact on calories. What's the easiest way for someone to approach that calorie deficit and that process of fat loss when they are a vegan, trying to balance all of those things, like still keep a lid on it, but actually still eat something that's relatively normal and edible?
Yeah, I mean, the big mistake a lot of people make is trying to replicate their non-vegan food or non-vegan meal with vegan options. So a lot of, I mean, especially vegan snack food can be really high calorie compared to its omnivorous counterpart, because I mean, the companies selling these foods want them to taste really good, right? They want you to go, oh, that tasted amazing. And, you know, if they have an ethical backing, they want you to do it because they want you to pick theirs over the non-vegan version. But all of them just want to make money. So they want you to buy that product again. So it needs to taste really good. So it's going to be packed full of things like sugar, salt, fat, all the things that, you know, stimulate, you know, our taste buds and are usually going to be higher in calorie. You know, the foods that are higher in those things are usually going to be higher in calorie than foods that I would say that are normal in those things. Like similar to how it used to be very, very common that low fat foods would be higher in sugar because they still want it to taste good. So they kind of do that. But I mean, it's just about, as I said earlier, being protein centric. If you take away the idea of, right, I need to get this many grams of protein, this many grams of carbs, and this many grams of fat, you kind of just need to go, right, I need to get this many grams of protein within my overall calorie target, and sack off the rest of it. You know, usually if you have a fat loss goal, you're probably going to be low on energy anyway in the gym and if you have any performance goals. So it's something you need to recognize beforehand. And, you know, if your performance is super important to you, then maybe you need to choose those protein sources that come with carbohydrates rather than the ones that come with fats. Like I said, it needs to be that protein-centric approach where you don't exceed your calories, and how you do that, it's kind of going to be up to you and the foods that you enjoy. If you really enjoy lentils, for example, then you're probably going to be on the side of, you know, higher carbohydrates, lower fat, just to fit within that target. Looking at a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, isolated protein sources, purely just because, you know, it's lower calorie to have just protein. And then you can go and eat a proteinless meal right after it if you want, or eat a proteinless meal and have a protein shake for dessert, whatever. You know, it's not, the meal's composition isn't going to be the same as an omnivorous meal. It's not going to be like, you know, chicken, rice, and veggies, or that, you know, classic, the rock diet where it's chicken, rice, and broccoli. You know, you can't just replace the rice with lentils and then replace the chicken with whatever meat substitute, because then the total of that is going to be higher in calorie, because if you replace gram for gram the carbohydrates, you haven't considered the protein from the lentils, and then you've probably gone over on your protein for that meal. And if you did that every meal, you go over on your calories. So yeah, you kind of have to forget about the other macros for a while, really get protein centric, stay within your calorie targets. And then, you know, if you really want to, for whatever reason, maybe have a performance goal and you want to try and maximize your training while you're trying to drop fat, then maybe start looking at your carbohydrate and fats. But for the most part, I mean, most people don't need to worry about it. And most people, as long as they're replenishing some of their glycogen stores, aren't going to notice a massive difference between having, you know, a higher ratio of fats to carbs or the other way around.
Cool. So we'll wrap this one up with one more question. And that is for the people who are doing or have done Veganuary, and maybe they enjoyed the process, maybe it was a little bit difficult, they want to make it a little bit more of a thing, a lifestyle change, something sustainable. Any top tips for those people who are getting to that end point, want to continue, maybe struggle with a few different bits and pieces of it, over and above what you've kind of already touched on already? Any top tips for those people to make it a successful way of eating long into the future?
Yeah, it's probably the best tip I can give is that if you want to continue this long term after Veganuary, it's no longer a novelty thing. It's no longer just, I'll try all the vegan treats that are in Tesco's or wherever you shop. It's getting to the point now where, after this month, if you continue to try all the vegan treats, you're going to gain body fat, and you're probably not going to get enough protein if you're, filling all your calories with non-protein centric food. So it's about, maybe your next challenge for the next month is to focus on more protein centric foods. And then after the next month, evaluate and go, right, is this now a diet that I can see myself adhering to for the next X amount of time? Adherence is a pretty strong word, because the thing is, right, the goal of any person with the ethics that lead them to go plant-based is to decrease the amount of overall, death and suffering. And if you can just eat a little bit less of animal products, then that is going to have a decrease by however much you would have eaten normally in the death and suffering of animals. And that is an important thing to remember, that it's not all about being perfect and never eating an animal product again, and for the rest of your life screaming out from the rooftops how vegan you are. There's more to it than that, and probably the biggest thing is that you don't have to succeed the first time, and you don't have to be perfect forever. Like, if everyone turned around and half the world's population decided they weren't eating animal products 6 out of the 7 days a week, then would I still be plant-based? Maybe not. Maybe I'd go back to eating some dairy products on that 7th day of the week. And as I've mentioned heaps of times, everyone's got their own line. Maybe you try going vegan and it doesn't work out for you, but you end up only going vegetarian. That's still a huge step compared to being completely omnivorous and consuming all of that meat and whatever. And maybe you really want to add meat back into your diet for whatever reason. Maybe you struggled with the protein consumption. Maybe you just really missed meat. You can still make huge leaps and bounds for, if the environment was your concern, for example, having a functioning planet for your children and your children's children. You can have a huge impact by just not eating beef. You don't have to go even vegetarian. You certainly don't have to go vegan to have an impact on the environment. So it's going to be wherever your ethics lie, wherever that line is for you. Just lost my headphones. Wherever that line is for you, that's going to make the big difference for. You got me?
Yeah.
Cool. It's going to make the big difference for your success. As I said, if you try and be perfect the whole time, you're probably going to find that that's near on impossible. And if you quit every time that you make a mistake, you're probably never going to make any big change. But if you just, each time you have another meal coming up is another opportunity you have to make a more ethical decision or a less ethical decision, or a decision that benefits you, or a decision that benefits an animal, or whatever the case is. It could be, right, I've eaten completely vegan for a month. Now I want a week of back to omnivorous, and then I want to go completely vegan for a month. Whatever that is, like however it works for the person listening to this or watching this who's making that change. Any step in what you consider to be the right direction is going to be a good step.
Yeah, and it's some interesting points you make about the drawing of the line, and maybe sort of experimenting where, do you want to be full vegan, or do you want to significantly and massively reduce your consumption of animal products, and where do you want to sit on that kind of spectrum? And from my own personal perspective, I did sort of dabble in going for a full vegan diet. And at the time, I found it just quite expensive because I'm not the best cook in the world. So I was just buying the kind of straight up substitutes, so vegan burgers and things like that, and that kind of the price of those ratchets up quite quick. So I was like, well, that's sustainable. So what I decided to do in the end was say, okay, well, what seems to be the real logical things that I can swap? So swapping whey protein powder for a vegan protein powder seemed like an easy one. Once I found a protein powder that I enjoyed, cool, no problem, get all the protein I need. Then I don't have dairy-based milk, so I have either an oat milk or an almond milk or something like that. And then so when I kind of work it through, and I was just kind of thinking about what my diet looks like while you were talking there, and I think that the only meal I have any like meat in is probably my dinner, and it's not a huge amount because or actually I have some yogurt in the evening as well. But so when you kind of take the protein shakes, when you take all the other things that I'm eating, actually I don't need that much meat in that last meal to actually achieve the protein intake that I want for my own specific goals. So I think for me, that kind of achieves my ethical objective of trying to, for my own reasons, decrease the amount of meat that I eat and things like that. Because I used to be a very much, back in the day, very much bro. Basically every meal was freaking chicken or rice or whatever. And I thought I had to consume mountains of the stuff because that was kind of the goal. But then I think when you come a little bit more educated on it, then you kind of realize, actually, there's multiple different ways I can do this. And, do I have to do it the bro way, or is there a little bit different way of doing it? So it's all very interesting. So then, Nick, definitely. We've talked about a little bit about coaching, talked a little bit about your YouTube channel. People now, I can assume, now want to follow you on Instagram. They want to kind of subscribe to your YouTube channel and ding the bell for notifications on YouTube and all of that sort of good stuff. So where should they be going?
Yeah, my Instagram is Nicktrition_, because apparently somebody else thought of that before me. And my YouTube is youtube.com/C/Nicktrition. So C for channel /Nicktrition. And yeah, I mean, you can subscribe, you can watch some videos and make a decision on whether you want to subscribe. And, for the people who are listening who aren't plant-based or aren't vegan, I've done one series on vegan nutrition for Veganuary, and it's my vegan survival guide. Outside of that, I talk about everything that, Simon talks about on this podcast. And, that I'm sort of branching out into some other things, but for the most part, it's very similar information to what you get here with Simon, probably because we did the same qualification.
There you go.
Yeah, but that's the best place to find me. I did just want to lastly, mention, because you mentioned that you were swapping out a lot of the meals you were having for, easy to prepare vegan options. That is something I didn't mention earlier when you said one of the biggest mistakes is that people go for those, the vegan burgers or the vegan schnitzel or whatever. And those things are usually made to replicate whatever they're trying to replicate. So I know that sounds stupid, but like a traditional burger patty, not low in fat at all. So when they make the vegan version, it's also not low in fat at all. And so where you would normally go for, 5% mince or something like that to try and decrease the amount of fat you were getting from it, you don't have that option with some of the vegan alternatives. They're going to almost always create the most widely purchased version of something before they then create, a lower fat version or a lower calorie version. And you see that with, let's use ice cream as an example. They made vegan ice cream way before they made any vegan low calorie ice creams. Even though low calorie ice cream is still out there, most people are still buying the full calorie or the full fat ice cream or whatever you want to call it. And so when they made vegan versions of them, they made the most purchased version. And then, some brands have now branched out into lower calorie vegan versions of ice cream. So it was just one thing I wanted to add onto the last thing you said.
Oh, awesome. And just for clarity for everyone as well, in terms of your coaching and those sorts of services, you're open to all denominations of food intake. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned that I get a lot of vegans, but I mean, the majority of people that I coach are not vegan or vegetarian in any way. I just, when people find out, after this podcast goes out, I'll probably get, a few clients who are all vegan, and then I won't put any more content out about being vegan for a while. And I'll just get, all the omnivorous people coming in like anyone would.
Awesome. All right then, Nick. Appreciate it, brother. And another
No
great podcast in the books. Well,
Thanks very much, man.
Back for episode 5 or 6 or whatever it is sometime in the future.
I want to make the full 10.
Indeed. Cool, man. So take it easy. Enjoy. Can you enjoy lockdown? I don't know. Make it through lockdown.
When you're antisocial, you can.
And we'll speak soon.
Cheers, mate. Catch you later.
Cool.